Welcome back to Mark's Headroom. What is this, week 4 or 5 of this experiment? I've just fasted another week after nearly 4 years of doing this pattern of 5 days of fasting and then eating for 2 days. Technically eating within a 53-hour window, so it's just a little bit over 2 days of window of eating. So it's been an interesting week. It's been a hard week for me. I follow some astrology, and I have a couple of yods in my natal astrological chart. And to me, it's just like reading like if you're born in the Ozarks, you have certain characteristics that you probably have versus being born in Bombay, India. And so this natal imprint is something that does somehow affect our lives to some degree or more or less for people, depending upon probably how much people, um, how much they really are dedicated to the programming that they had from their environment versus what they are naturally attuned to. So anyway, I've got a couple of yods. One is has Saturn on the apex, which makes um, life a little more about the lessons that you learn. And the other has Jupiter at the apex, and that's actually probably the most prominent feature because it has some major planets on the um, at the base of that yod. Yod is, I don't know where that word really came from, but YOD, and it means the finger of God. And so I've got a lot of times people that have this in their natal chart have lives that don't really make a lot of sense in the normal, they have extraordinary lives. And sometimes they can be tragic and painful and have a lot of misunderstandings. So that explains a little bit of it for me, and I may be going back and reverse engineering some stuff that I've experienced in life and reading it into those yods. But if you listen to some of my um, explorations in life and reference some work that I've done with Gurdjieff's fourth way teachings, and even, I can look into the Gospels and see, that Jesus spoke to some of the same um, had some of the similar insights that he was speaking to in some of the deeper truths that sometimes reality happens, and then as we explain it to ourselves, we kind of end up self-justifying. So, sorry, I may have taken you on a roundabout trip there, and I don't really apologize, but I say sorry because it's uncomfortable for people sometimes to follow what I'm saying because I've been exposed to more and may see and feel a little bit more than the common person may have felt in their own life yet. So some of this stuff may sound a little nonsensical, and if you're a Gomer Pyle, you'll label me and probably shut me down and won't listen much longer. But last I looked, I had about, I don't know, 40 subscribers to this channel on YouTube, and I'm just going to continue the experiment and try to talk for about an hour here today. There's some things or one thing in particular that I wanted to clear up from last week. But before I do that, let me continue this yod explanation thing and just say, I've got some work going on with Jupiter, and it's in like a professional part of my life that is really, it's more about, how I'm perceived in the world and kind of my mission. And there seems to be a lot of factors in the cosmology that are creating conditions on the earth here at this time that are really bringing me forth and exciting me about some potential changes, and actually having the chance to bring some of my work forward to potentially help others and gain a maybe some satisfaction for myself and some well, a chance to advance the inner work that I've done and share it, which is part of what's happening here with Mark's Headroom. And then that other part of the yod is, the one about the lessons. I mean, that's where I've had a lot of hard lessons about what I've inherited in life. And it's funny, I was just doing taping or filming a uh, a 3-chapter segment from Gurdjieff's writing Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. And one of one of the chapters he deals in the idea that we've lost a sense of gratitude for what we've inherited from our ancestors and all the hard work that's been done to create the circumstances that we can sit here, like I can be sitting here right now and filming this and sharing this with others who can essentially see it for free around the world. And that's only available because of the collective progressions that have occurred. And so often we take this for granted. It's just something that we expect. Like, well, he uses some terms that were developed 100 years ago or more, but simplistically, he says something like, just like your nose on your face, you see some things and experience some things in your life that you just take for granted. And so by recognizing that, we can feel deeper and have some gratitude for those who have come before us. And a lot of the work that Gurdjieff does is deep inner work that really speaks to seeing beyond the causalities that we are pretty quick to jump um, to make and to fix in our lives. So I'll leave the Gurdjieff work aside for now, but the yods are have been triggered pretty heavily this last week or so, and I felt a lot of deep inner discomfort, and a lot of that rub is in trying to place some of the inner feelings that you have in the world, or that you feel inside as maybe an artist or as someone that's struggling to reconcile, where these came from and where they're going, and how to express them, and how to focus on things that are meaningful and things that you believe that might actually benefit yourself as well as others. And when those don't find immediate placement in the world, then it's a cause, for someone to pause and consider, reflect, try to find the next pathway or improvise something new to express. And that's kind of where some of my um, writing and character development, personal growth, ideas, the creativity that I use to try to express and deal with those emotions, rather than try to bury them or drink them away or eat them away. I end up spending a lot of time with my own perceptions and feelings, even though I may be out in public and exerting myself in normal social American lifestyle situations. I'm usually feeling a lot more and seeing things a lot differently than people around me. So, Yods, big activity going on. Some of the things that I've read would lead me to think there's going to be some changes that occur in the world, and maybe in my life and my role. So I'm open to that. One of the things I mentioned in the last segment of Mark's Headroom was about a family pattern that had been passed down through several generations. And I failed to put some closure to one of the characters, the original character, which I called K90, and it's the older lady that really began uh, sharing with me the and kind of gave me the insights to track the patterns that I saw being acted out in the generations that followed her. And but a powerful part of a story is always the end or the closure of it. And so at the end of her life, she became desperate in her 90s to reconnect and to, I believe, offload some of the guilt and despair that she felt for her original pattern behavior, where she left her first husband and abandoned her first child. And that child became an alcoholic and really, to my knowledge, never did anything of what is perceived by American standards of much value in his life. And so when when K90 shared this story with me, I think I asked her a few questions and just kind of understood and accepted what had happened in her life, and that was an unusual. I think most people in her life probably tried to explain it away or defend it somehow, which I did not. I really just accepted it and felt it for what it was, and really just saw the guilt and the shame and the regret that she had, which was reaching an authentic stage for someone that had lived a rather artificial, kind of a materialistic survival, American patterned life, and passed those patterns on to most of the other people in her life. So this was a really bold move that she made in her 90s, which was just to uproot herself from a very comfortable setting in a retirement community where she was looked after closely by the what, one, two, even three generations away, and had really an ideal situation by American standards set up to have a lifestyle and all the medical amenities nearby. But this unsettledness that she became to feel more and more in herself really began to drive her need to reconnect and to try to reconcile that relationship. So she suddenly uprooted and just left. And although I and some others had gone to some pretty extensive efforts to bring her into this lifestyle, thinking this was kind of the last stage of her life that, we could make most comfortable and peaceful and enjoyable and connected with her great grandchildren. Um, she threw all that aside, went away, maybe 250 miles away to live near the son that she abandoned years earlier that had become an alcoholic and really was probably battling suicide and a lot of depression and what we would call mental disorders in maybe modern life today. But anyway, I don't know exactly how that ended up being worked out between them, but I do know that that was a very, very strong need that she had at the end of her life that really surprised everyone. And hopefully it was a gift because I think it was driven by some inner authentic needs that she really felt like she had to to mend. And maybe it meant something to the boy that she abandoned, and there could have been some closure there. But more importantly, and I'm just guessing here, anyone that hears this story and may even um, recognize some of these family patterns and so forth, it might encourage some others to break free from continuing those patterns and try to make those connections with the people that you may have robotically abandoned or betrayed, and find a way to reconnect, to establish and understand why you did what you did, and to go beyond the mechanical um, behaviors and patterns that are protected by, a lot of times there's a lot of pride involved, and so they just people keep those things secret and don't talk about them, yet they drive so many behaviors and they push people apart. And I think it's important for us collectively, as well as just it all starts at an individual basis, to throw down the shame and despair and forget about how it looks or what the appearance is. I mean, it may actually cost you something. I mean, I think that's why there's a lot of posturing and big egos running around the world, winning at the at all costs. And at the end of their life, they may find a priest or a close loved one, or they may take it to the grave alone, which is a really horrible thought, because I think the collective really benefits from people being authentic and fighting through many of those pattern and robotic things that dehumanize our experience. But I wanted to put closure to that story, because I thought that was a powerful story, and it's one that well, I participated in and I paid dearly for, to understand that. And actually I had written this out and kind of sketched out a diagram. I was wondering and kind of grappling with how I could work with this creatively to communicate it to others, maybe through a screenplay or writing a movie or a series, because it was so fascinating to think that this could be something that would illustrate this family pattern. And we're so fascinated with this mix of entertainment with, feeling deeper and bringing some authenticity to artistic mediums, that, that I can't help but keep that from, writing a novel or making a pseudo documentary or something to, to illustrate that and to help people recognize those patterns in their own lives, to help them break through and go deeper, um, was something that I was grappling with. So I was making these notes and I left them out. And one of this lady's of K90's great grandkids found that. And it, and that, I think that person was probably about 14 or 15 at the time. It was very disturbing for her to see those truths about her great grandmother, because there were so many other losses and things that people were ashamed of in the family, that they had kind of built this lady up as someone that was nearly perfect. And I think that blew her mind. And it ended up leading to the exodus of me from that relationship with that family. So I wanted to also share some other things that I came across today and was summarizing today as I was kind of doing a little bit of prep work here for Mark's Headroom. And I had a good friend that texted me this morning that had seen just a short clip of one of my videos that I think he found it on Instagram, and he mentioned Brené Brown. And I have to admit, there's part of me that may be a little bit jealous of someone that has achieved notoriety as a researcher or someone that's a renowned therapist or counselor. And um, so I grapple with that a little bit. But I also have found myself finding that name mentioned over and over and over again by several counselors or therapists that I've known and interviewed, worked with. And, I think, that, there's a lot of therapists that create great coffee books and great, books. And there's a closure that comes to each piece of work that they have of getting paid for it and someone reading it and feeling like they've accomplished what is in that piece of work or maybe from the session feels like they've actually done something to change their life. And I think the work that I'm doing with the fourth way with Gurdjieff in particular, um, which I think really mirrors esoteric Christianity, because it's not about morality, it's about finding the deeper meaning behind things and transcending that and finding ways that are spiritually operative in your life to reach those and find ways to express those in your daily life with others, your relationships and your how you work with your own being, with your own essence, can eventually become a powerful position to work from, to manage your states and to become, more than a mechanical being. So I just really morphed far from where I started here with Brené Brown's coffee books and my friend's suggestion or encouragement this morning to keep after it. I appreciate that encouragement, and I also appreciate Brené Brown and her work because you know I guess the first thing that comes to mind, if one of Brené Brown's audience, maybe they're suffering, and maybe it's over something that could be like, for me, I wouldn't really relate to this, but there's someone that lost a tennis bracelet and that was causing them a lot of distress. Maybe it was an important bracelet. Maybe it belonged to their mother or grandmother or great grandmother, and it was a family heirloom that had a lot of meaning, and they really regretted being careless. And, all those things pointed toward some deeper element of their life that they were really dealing with and trying to overcome. Well, the pain of losing that tennis bracelet on the surface sounds rather, like a first world problem or a one percenter problem. It's like, that's a minor loss relative to someone that's been raped or betrayed or, struck by, the force of nature and lost, their home, or maybe was defending their country and lost a leg or a hand or a loved one. Those pains are on have a whole different hierarchy to them. And, but I think my point here is that I don't want to diminish And I think it's important for us all to recognize that everyone has is at their own stage of development, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, and maturing through life and dealing with things in it's much more complex than Gomer Pyle or some oversimplified, um, forceful, character might have you believe. And we can overcomplicate it, don't get me wrong, and you can overthink things, and you can overfeel things, and you can overreact. So it's important to find balance, but the Brené Brown thing is really important to recognize that there are small things to some people that are large things to others, and we need to be empathetic about it. So whether you lost a tennis bracelet or lost a hand or lost a loved one, those are all losses. And for one person, it may be just the beginning of some self-awareness and self-discovery and self-observation as to what's going on inside of them. And that can be a great way to look deeper. And but I'll kind of leave that or park that thought right there, because what I see the pattern is people will go through a book, maybe one written by an expert or a researcher or someone that's a celebrity or popular, and having completed that book, they almost feel like they've completed that lesson, but they haven't done the real inner work to fundamentally own the changes that may have been outlined or proposed in that work. So I'm going to leave that there. And I think I've stated that clearly enough that it might be of interest to you. Examine deeper for yourself. Well, this week I also found myself, I put a video out early this week about the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus delivered. If you haven't seen it, ask me for a link in some of the comments. I'd love to share it with more people. And I also came across one of my other people that this keeps turning up over and over again is Seth. They call him Seth Godin, and he's a marketing guy. He's a guy that's my age or a little older. I think he grew up in New York in a very affluent and cultured environment. And I finally figured something out that he was saying. He said um, he encourages people to really to conform and look for patterns that are working for others, and just to apply them yourself and repeat those yourself rather than looking for originality, because it takes too long to try to be original or unique, and it's risky. Well, he's right about that. Um, Something else I came across was in my own work, I've had a lot of, over the past 5 to maybe 8 years, I've had a lot of these ancient masters their work has really been presented to me, and I must have attracted it and maybe needed it. But a lot of them came from Eastern Europe and from like Germany, like Hermann Hesse, George Gurdjieff, Carl Jung, and there's several others that I could mention, but it's not really necessary. My point is that those areas 100 years ago, 150 years ago, there was a lot of fascism. There was a lot of communism. There were a lot of people that were really suffering. Well, even some of the acting um, methods that have been developed by Stanislavski, Meisner, Chekhov, and others originated in that area where people were fighting the kind of the norms of society to get through to the fundamentals and core of human nature to be able to, I think that they're always looking for a way to master it, to be able to to repeat a certain emotion or in a certain circumstances in a play, for example, for theatrical reasons, or to gain power over others and impress others with your ability to master reality. So that I found it was very insightful and interesting that a number of these bodies of work that I and others, the philosophies, the Nietzsche and several others came out of that region from that time frame. And I think it's very relevant today because I think a lot of people are feeling some of those same vibes go on today. And I'm not going to get into a lot of politics here, but I can't help but feel what I feel, and I think a lot of people are feeling, some of those old patterns creeping into what we had hoped was a um, more clean and free and more peaceful future, which I'm hoping with more inner work that I could contribute potentially to the collective that that's actually achieved. I believe that nature will and God will eventually pave the way for that. There may be some painful processes that take place in between there, and the point that we do look around and see the beauty and peace of the unity that we really, and all the resources that we really have access to, as opposed to all the differences and the infighting. So I found myself making a few notes during the week, and let's see. Oh, an interesting aspect of this. This wasn't 100 years ago, but about 40 years ago, there was a guy named Alan Krakauer that left Toronto. He was raised in a wealthy family, was I think a media, um, he was a kind of a teacher and involved in creating some media, maybe doing some film work in Toronto. And he also had a drug habit. And he went on a trip, and he left and ended up on the island of Ibiza in Europe, and changed his name to Rahu and created human design. And another um, acquaintance of mine recently left human design. That became kind of a I guess you could use it to avoid feeling your own life, and in that way it kind of became a cult. And so this guy wrote a book recently about the cult of human design. You might want to check that out. Put a comment in the feed here, and I'll try to tell you how to get that book if you're interested. But human design was an interesting thing to stumble upon, and I'm looking over at my notes here because it provided a very interesting narrative for deconditioning and for seeing yourself in a more objective, potentially naturalistic way that could help you work with your inner life if you so desire. I mean, I guess you could also use it just to try to manipulate outer life so you don't have to really feel. That's really up to you as to whether you go inner or whether you just try to use it to be more superficial. But um, I've had a number of people continue to contact me, and I think I get weekly, contact with people from this era that I was heavily involved in creating some material or repeating some material that I was learning and trying to understand myself with the collective who were engaging in the human design material. So I went through a lot of that this week, and I found that this Ra Uru Hu figure to be super fascinating. And so if you're bored, and I've taught on Transcendent, my YouTube channel, I have a lot of his material or some of that material out there to kind of move the ball along in terms of your own inner development, if you like. And I have a ton of those resources around me. And if you're interested, throw me a comment and I'll try to hook you up. But one of the things that he delivered was delivered this thing called the Gray Course, and he delivered it in I think maybe 5 or 6 times formally for others that it was recorded. I have audios of those courses, and in it he kind of gives a cosmological explanation of things as to how we ended up where we are today. And then he tries to give a projection as to where we're going forward from here. Now, let me warn you, I don't really see some of this stuff as being literal, but I think figuratively, it does give us, and it can defy language, because, the language that I'm using right now was developed, a few thousand years ago, probably, and is really rather limited. But some of the figures and symbols that he uses and some of the evolutionary aspects of humanity that are described using some of the stories and the symbols, are very instructive to help you get unstuck, in your life here today. And I've found that if you can accept some of these things that almost sound like comic book ish characterizations and stories, much like Gurdjieff used in his Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. If you can just accept those as for what they are, without, literally believing that there was a Beelzebub and there was a grandson, and but see them for the metaphors that they really are. Much like you use esoteric Christianity, Christ sayings and teachings can become super powerful mechanisms to help you evolve spiritually and really supplement your life in ways that, I hope to be able to help facilitate some of that. But this work that Ra Uru Hu did through the Gray Course, he illustrates, a mutation that's going to occur, he says, in 2027, which is just probably about a year and a few months away. I think it was February of 2027. There's supposed to be the beginning of some mutations that occur in mankind. And it's the beginning of people really abandoning some of the communication channels that we use today, like speech and writing and probably video, to resume some of the things that, to borrow another Christian kind of mystic, Rudolf Steiner spoke of perceptions that mankind had at one point in time that were really lost and would help, if recognized, to resume in his ability to perceive more spiritual or higher aspects of ourselves. And I think Ra Uru Hu's sequence in this mutation, going from this nine-centered, singular individual to these beings, I think they're called aeons, where they find themselves in groups of 5 And they find that they have this knowing about each other that's unspoken. So it's not even necessary for them to speak to each other as much as it is that they just need to be together. And with that, they have more power than an individual and more power than humans have. And that as this mutation occurs and these kind of mutants, become born and existing on Earth, there'll be this dichotomy between caring for these dysfunctional by normal human standards today, caring for this mutation that's really the future of mankind, because they will, no matter if it takes 100 years or 1,000 years, they will develop. Nature is behind this, and they'll evolve into this powerful being. And then there will be another mutation that occurs where there will be one more evolution of mankind. So that's something to examine. If you're interested, again, shoot me a note, and I will try to hook you up with some of that material. And I don't mean it literally, that these are things that I'm not trying to induce fear or get a following here, but I find it very beneficial for inner development to use some of these, the symbols and the stories to help give you access to your heritage and to the future of humanity and release you from some of the dogma that you get stuck in here in this lifetime that you may be trapped in since you were formed, and many of your patterns were for survival in the current day world were laid down that you're potentially owning and maybe separating from to some degree, identifying things that work for you and things that are holding you back, especially spiritually. So that was I think that was hopefully that's a cool sharing, and some of you will pick up on some of the suggestions, to look deeper into that. Um, I've also had some thoughts about transparency. You may, if you've heard me talk here or elsewhere, I believe that there's some real benefits that are coming by our sharing on social media. I think over the past 20 years, we've exposed celebrities and institutions, in many cases, for what was really hidden and damaging a lot of people, and really was mind-blowing to see, like the Catholic Church and how they had, the pedophiles and some of those things were damaging people. And it wasn't even necessarily just the damage that took place at the original event, but it was the sustained collective idea that these were perfect institutions or perfect priests when they weren't. And that division was, turning people into alcoholics, addictive people, and drug users, and just creating division in the world. And it's one of my theories is that the more those things are exposed for what they are, then the better off we all are, because suppression ultimately creates secrets and shame and guilt and separates people. And then whenever we, get rid of that, we can really identify the beauty that or the connections that we do have. Although, some of the feelings that went into, creating those situations may have been the results of suppression. So that that is a circle that we have to really be aware of. And I think that's our constant calling into sincerity and humility in our lives to not sustain, those patterns that we get caught up for pride or ego or for, um, these survival loyalties that we have where we, serve the greater good, but put up with situations that we can't support. And that division is what creates and sustains what some people might call evil, but it keeps people stuck in these patterns and creates a sense of injustice, and it draws everyone down. Whereas the higher principles would have a chance to develop as more of us understand this dynamic that I'm describing. So transparency is something that I like. And, in fact, that's why, Transcendent, my YouTube channel, exists. And I think the whole concept around PTSD is one that benefits from transparency. And that's where healing can occur. Authenticity can get its roots and work from. And you can identify originality versus, true creativity that may be organic rather than just repeated patterns that are being thrown around and are causing people to just escape their lives rather than live them. But one of the things that occurred to me is that in my life, because I was exposed to so much so young, is that I've had a chance to kind of see how things operated behind the scenes. And, without being, judgmental, or I'm not trying to, you know, throw others, cast a negative light on others, but having seen what happens in boardrooms and where major decisions are made that affect other people, um, and then seeing how the world sees it collectively from the outside based on headlines or reporting and narratives and story, I've always had a disconnect since I saw into, and let's just use a simple example here of maybe um, a politician getting bought off to look the other way. So a certain business venture can be executed. And you could do the same, use the same metaphor around, a rich member of the community paying off the law enforcement to hide a murder that his son or daughter had committed. And, if you know that, then that gives you, if you have all that information, then that makes, for a more complete, understanding of what's going on. Now, if you know that and you then hear and you see the people suffering with the unknown of why their daughter was killed or why this event happened, this false sense of causality that is built in the community through the headlines, the narratives, the stories, that totally really misleads everyone from the truth of what happened between certain individuals. Well, that's only, I mean, number one, it creates dissonance to know that you can't tell that story because the same forces that protect that story, the truth of that story, could kill you, or put you in prison, or affect your reputation, um, causes you to suppress that story. That creates, great dissonance. And But an even greater dissonance, I think, is seeing the narrative that develops and is accepted on the surface by the collective, and watching that narrative, these people that are misinformed about how things work in the world, is very painful. And I think, that may be one of the reasons Jesus wept, is that, there were just a lot of things that were happening And the common assumptions in life were maybe more superficial without looking deeper at understanding what's really going on. Now, I think right now, with the transparency that we have through social media and what's happening in America in particular, there's a lot of things that are being done so boldly that they're not even being hidden, that they're actually being announced and carried out. And it's blowing people's minds. The morality, the ethics, the law, and the rules, and the sense of justice that we all felt was so sacred is no longer a sacred cow. And it's allowing other people everyone, to really see how things probably have really existed behind the scenes. Because, and let's just take, for example, I'm a leader and there's someone that works for me that makes big decisions, and I tell that leader to decide this for everybody. And suddenly all these businesses their world is turned upside down because of some rationalization that is made by the leader. And no one else really has an understanding that, the decision was really made at the top or in the boardroom behind the scenes. And it's not about, the person that may end up with the business, being exceptionally, successful or talented or whatever. The result that they've ended up with may have started from an entirely, something that's not even obvious to associate with the causality that's really operating behind the scenes. So I hope I explained that well enough that you could appreciate what I'm saying is that we may be in for some tough times right now, and we're feeling some things that are very uncomfortable, but I think it may be for the better of the collective that we're actually seeing how the binary operates, and there's a lot of really great potential truths that are being exposed. And I think if we can survive this, the collective is going to be in a more healthy place to make wiser decisions that are based on more fundamental truths than are operative in this binary that ends up, taking place and operating on the surface. So I hope I explained that well enough. If you got some questions, ask, and I'll try to work on that next week if that's something of interest to everybody. I touched on the concept of division here and the origin of division. And I think it's important to point out that, and I noticed this in someone today or earlier this week, where although they said something on the surface, you had the sense that there was a level of contempt for the person that they were speaking to. And although they didn't say, I have contempt for you, literally, it was delivered in the way that they dealt with the other person. And I think when you recognize that in yourself, you really need to do some deep examination, because there is something in yourself that you're not fully accepting when you feel that level of contempt. And it's easier to spot these things in the outer world than sometimes it is, in the inner world. But the outer always points back to the inner. And I think inner, it's probably, a cycle or a continuous um, way that our circumstances present themselves, the outer and inner and outer. So if you find yourself feeling contempt for another person, and you notice that division in yourself as to how you're dealing with them, maybe to tolerate them, maybe you're just trying to buy some time to figure out how to deal with them honestly. Well, that would be a noble move. rather than just trying to undermine them and show them who's boss. Um, let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, hmm. I did some work this week so I stumbled across some feeds because in my future wise energy um, work that I publish, basically updates on what's going on with oil and gas upstream business around the world, who's drilling wells or how many wells are drilled and what the prices are and how they're affected by geopolitics. Well, at this phase of my life, several years ago, I found myself doing the best I could to provide for. I mean, I got married early, had kids early, and I've always considered myself to be a family man. And um, my way of providing for them was through the education that I got, and reluctantly completed a petroleum engineering degree and didn't really know anything about the oil business coming out of the Ozarks. But I was pretty smart and I did well in school and I showed well. So I ended up starting a couple of oil companies and ended up at some private equity conferences in my maybe 15 years ago. It's when some of this started to really unfold for me. And, the interesting thing was that I found myself being quite popular with that crowd because I could lead people and I was essentially, probably noted as someone that was smart and showed well. And they misunderstood that I think they thought I was a lot more conforming and materialistic than I actually am. So that ultimately led to my ouster. But one time, there's an interesting story, if you'll bear with me here. I was in some resort near Phoenix at this big convention. It was for their investors, and there were a lot of Chinese there at the time. And I found myself being kind of used as a showman. And I looked across the table, and there's the chairman of AT&T was over there, and he almost looked. We almost looked a lot alike. Kind of carried ourselves the same way. Of course, I didn't have his position in the world, but these Chinese people didn't know the difference. And I was speaking to business and talking to oil and gas, and that was pretty interesting to those people. And I think my point here is that we can look around and we can see how we're being recognized in the world. And maybe there's some needs that are being met that are really honest and sincere. And I'm not going to be, I mean, who am I to say? I'm not the morality judge here, but or the police. I think we all have to do things to survive. And we're like me, in that moment, there's a lot that I learned from being around and in that situation, for being recognized, for who I was and the human potential that I brought into the room. And, it was my failure at that point in my life to, not have brought forth a better platform where I could work, on things that really mattered to me. But at the time, the things that really mattered to me was providing for my family and kids, people that I'd hired into my company, and just following through on some things that I started in my life that ultimately I didn't really see how I was going to finish. I had, high hopes that the outcomes would be beneficial materialistically and align with my natural values and my spirituality. So the story's about all I got left out of that one. But I found myself really getting hit with a lot of questions about private equity this week, and I think we're kind of at a crossroads in at least in the upstream oil and gas, where private equity has been working a certain way with that industry, and now that we've got a change in administration here in the United States, it looks like they're shifting to work differently. I'll leave that at that. Let's see if there's anything else worth mentioning here. I already covered that. Well, the Gurdjieff work that I've started putting out there on my Substack, and send me a note. I think I'd really encourage people to dive into some of that Gurdjieff work. I'm trying to make it understandable and relevant, not just some, you know, kind of silly maze that people have to dance through to get to the heart of what Gurdjieff was speaking to. And I like the work of Ouspensky and Nicole in particular. But you could start with Ouspensky and then work your way into some of Nicole's work, or maybe listen to some of my videos to get to the heart of what he was doing there about tapping into your inner life and developing your ability to observe what's going on inside of you, which gives you a better, um, maybe a different perspective of the world than you've ever had a chance to consider. So thanks for listening again to Mark's Headroom here, and I hope you have a great week. I'll be back next week. All the best.